What is the distinction here? Is it the collapse of the consumer that is causing such a grim outlook, or is it something else?
I think what's really interesting in this is that we tend to think of sectors like manufacturing as being very cyclical, and those are the first to fall over in downturns. Whereas here, we're taking a conscious decision to shut down economies for health reasons, and it's affecting all sectors, and particularly those that are very labour-intensive in the service sector. So I think it's weakness across the board. What I think has changed over the past few days and weeks is that just the sheer magnitude of the lockdowns and the shutdowns across Europe is starting to come through, and analysts are starting to project that onto what might happen in the US. The second thing, which I think rightly is starting to happen, is an appreciation of the fact that even once the lockdowns are lifted, workplaces reopen, I think we're going back to a world where demand is going to be permanently subdued, because corporates, households, animal spirits are going to be diminished.
Morgan Stanley on a similar coming out and saying that the action by the Federal Reserve last week showing that the Fed is all in trying to avoid an L-shaped recovery. If animal spirits are subdued and you don't think the demand picture comes back right away, what letter of that alphabet are you predicting when it comes to an economic recovery?
Well, economists love to tie themselves up in this alphabet soup of different recoveries: V-shape, W-shape, U-shape, L-shape, J-shape. I think what's going to happen is that when workplaces reopen and these lockdowns are lifted, it will start to look like a V-shape quite quickly, because production will start to come back. The supply side of the economy will start to get working again. But then we'll quite quickly run into this reality of weaker demand. So things will start to level off. So if you look at the level of GDP, I think initially it will start to look like a V-shape, and we'll reassure ourselves that we're going back to business as usual. But then as the reality of weaker demand starts to come through, businesses are slower to pick up investment, consumers are slower to pick up spending. I think we'll be hit by this weakness of demand, and things will start to level off.
Neil,
so my sense is that it's going to change over time.
Walk me through some of the inflationary dynamics. CPI data on Friday was worse than expected. Chris Rupke over at MUFG says deflationary forces are the difference between a recession and a depression. Are you now worried about the lack of inflation?
Well, I think this is another area where economists have tied themselves in knots. Is this a deflationary or an inflationary shock? And it's possible to imagine it might be inflationary because, of course, you've shut down the supply side of the economy as well as there being demand weakness. So depending on how those two things play out, it could be either inflationary or deflationary. My sense is, in the first instance, it's certainly disinflationary, not least because oil prices are coming down, and that's going to knock a fair chunk off of headline inflation in the advanced economies over the coming months and quarters. As far as core inflation is concerned, I think that will dampen down too, partly because of what's happening in the labour market. But we know that the Phillips curve is flatter now than it has been in the past. Even in the 2008 crisis, core inflation came off a bit, but it didn't collapse into negative territory, at least in the US. So my sense is deflation, if I had to pick between in the short term whether deflation or inflation is the biggest threat, I certainly think it's probably deflation in the short term.